Tonight's episode of Board Chitless is sponsored by The Game Steward. The Game Steward is an online game store offering Kickstarter board games out of print and imported games at reasonable prices. It's time to play.
Hi there and welcome back to another episode of Board Chitless. This week it's Leki and I'm joined by
Tristan.
And we're taking a slight departure from our scheduled programming or our usual programming this week, and we're just going to have a little chat about some of our favourite solo games.
Should we explain why we're doing a departure?
Let's go for it.
Because we played Seventh Continent again because we're a bit hooked.
And we thought it might be boring to carry on
to cover the same game again.
A, it's amazing still, and B, we don't really know what we're doing when it comes to survival on an island. So that leads us straight into, going in no particular order, what our favourite games might be that are either designed as a solo experience or, as probably is more often the case, a game that has solo rules or can easily be modified to play solo. So do you want to go first, Tristan?
Yeah, interestingly, I think Seventh Continent would be an amazing game solo, and is and has been a great game solo, but that's not going to be in the top three that we're choosing to talk about.
Not making
tonight.
The informal countdown.
The informal list of the top three favourite solo games in the world ever at this moment in time, due to change potentially by tomorrow, depending on a given mood. That's the criteria, right?
Yes, it'll be quite a difficult set of initials to reel off at the top of your head. But you also left out the, in my humble opinion, at the end.
Oh yeah. So this is the top three favourite solo games for me right now.
Okay, cool. So what would be number 1, 2, or 3?
Right. So in no order because I couldn't choose.
Go for it.
So let's start with my most played solo game of last year, which I didn't design, which is Warfighter, the Special Forces card game.
Fantastic, yes.
Which is quite a surprise to me, actually, because there are other games that I would have thought thematically more interesting to me. Even though this is, don't get me wrong, Warfighter is top of the list for me. It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. But I tend to think, like, if I'm going to play a solo game, I want to sit down and play something epic, I'd choose something like with a fantasy sort of nature, or, something that's a really...
lots of big, bold moves and brave decisions and
which
daring do.
I guess Warfighter has, actually. And one of the things I think that's hooked me into coming back to it repeatedly is the campaign mode, mm-hmm. which... actually, ironically, is a little bit stitched on with Warfighter. This isn't to disparage the game. I love Warfighter, as probably evident from the podcast that we did specifically on Warfighter. But this is, the campaign does feel a little bit, it works. It works really well. And actually, it's the only way that I play it. But it's very, very simplistic. If you lose, that's the campaign over.
Yeah.
So there's no sort of real tracking of... success over the course of the campaign. You either win or you don't, sort of thing. If you do win, you get a number of points and you rack up those points as you go, and then by the end of it, the total number of points you get for completed missions is going to show whether or not your campaign, your Special Forces campaign, had an impact, and what sort of victorious impact that was, and whether or not it was sort of a drop in the ocean, or that you've actually managed to win the war on terror, or whatever sort of obscure objective it might be. And after each mission, if you win and you go on to the next one, to make it harder, you roll a d10, and it gives you like a penalty, like a handicap that you have to apply to all scenarios moving forward. So it can be something as simple as like all of the skill cards are now more expensive, and it's like a weird sort of set of arbitrary impediments that you can suffer after each mission, and because it's a dice roll, you could actually get the same one over and over and over. Technically, it'd be unlikely, statistically unlikely, but you could. So you could have it that, for example, you price out skills for the rest of the game because you keep getting the same result. So it's a really sort of strange kind of thing. It does work, but it's very sort of old school method of solving something like that. Instead of, if it was a deck of cards of disadvantages, you would get. You'd stack them up, and they'd be different by their nature. But because it's a die roll, you can just get the same thing every time. So it's a little bit strange in that respect. But the gameplay is so addictive, it does keep me coming back. And you can have things like following on from mission to mission. Like if a soldier's killed in action, he'll remain dead for the rest of the campaign. And you can set up your own campaign. So you could have I'm particularly fond of using the British Special Forces, for example. So you can have a British Special Forces themed campaign where you've got British troops, British equipment, and you go off into either the jungle or you go into the Middle East and fight the army or an insurgents or Eastern Europe. So you can choose a theatre of conflict, or if you want, you can link together different theatres over the course of the campaign. But basically, it's just a different way to play Warfighter. And at its core, it's a scenario-based game where you take a bunch of troops, special forces troops, drop them behind enemy lines. They go off on a mission to hunt down scud launchers or evil bosses or whatever, and just take out loads of soldiers on the way. And the gameplay is, for me, incredibly addictive. So much so that I racked up a ridiculous number of plays of this game last year, and I don't always make a note of every game that I play, but I do track Warfighter because it's interesting because of the campaign to see where my soldiers are up to. So just taking a glance at some of the scribbled notes showed exactly like how many games I played, and it was ridiculous. So that's my first entry in the top 3 solo games that I'm playing now and enjoy.
Fantastic. If that little snippet of Warfighter is kind of intrigued you a little bit, we did cover Warfighter between us a couple of weeks ago. So if you look back through your footlocker of SoundCloud files or the iTunes library, you should be able to pick that out and then just hear a bit more in depth about the game and what we thought about it as part of a 2-player game. I find it interesting that you were saying it's a bit of a simple game to play as a solo, and you thought that might work against it, because one of my pick, one of my favourite solo games is The Network by Gil Hover. And it's a game I picked up at UK Games Expo last year. It started off as a multiplayer experience, so it's a competitive game where you're each trying to run a cable TV channel. So you have to balance TV shows with your budget and also advertising that will get assigned to different shows, and also you're picking up star actors or minor celebrities in order to go into them. You can have comedy shows, you can have reality shows, you can have all sorts of different genres to go in there. Certain actors and actresses want to be attached to certain programs, so your minor celebrity wants to be in a reality show, your leading man wants to be in a TV movie, or he wants to be in the large production sci-fi. So there's all these things that kind of keeping you, lots of decisions to make about how you can most efficiently get the best show out there for the longest period of time, get them in the right time slots and stuff. And what was really great about this game in terms of a solo version, the solo rule set, is that Gil came up with a really great idea for managing how you can simulate the other players playing along with you. So you each take a turn one after the other. So when you're playing solo, you take a turn, but obviously you'll take your turn again. So each time you take a turn, then one of the actors or the program cards or the time slot cards will evaporate. And so a lot of your strategy, because it's essentially set out like a tableau in front of you, you've got your card, which will say, here's your time slots, this is how much resources you've got. And you'll see that there's some documentaries out there, there's a drama, there's a comedy, and you've got an actor that really wants to be in that drama, and you see an advertisement that will work off that as well. So you pick the advertisement up, and then the drama could evaporate in front of you. So you have to constantly...
So it's getting bought up by another network.
Exactly, yeah. So you have to constantly think of a plan B as well as what your plan A is. So if I can't get this, I'm going to jump for this other one.
So you're going to be like 2 moves ahead sort of thing.
Exactly, yeah. And it really keeps you thinking. And sometimes, you get really lucky. You manage to combo everything that you wanted to move against, and it just works out really nicely.
How does that pay off? Do you get victory points for it or something? Or...
Yeah, so it all works out on how much money programs generate. So having that, optimizing the right show at the right time with the right actor or advertisement will just bring in more money. And you'll just keep rinsing and repeating. There's optimal times to get rid of shows and cancel them and bring in a new show. to make sure that you're maximizing that each time. And you've got about 5 turns or so, 5 seasons in order to make as much money as you can and build up the amount of viewers that your channel's actually generating, which will work out as actual victory points in the end. So there's a big viewer tracker around the tracker board, and you just keep lapping that as many times as you can before you run out.
You have to bring it. I've not seen nor played. I have heard of it, but it's very unlike our usual destruction.
It is. It's on the lighter end of the gaming spectrum, but it's by no means super simplistic.
Right, bit of a thinker.
Yeah, there's enough going on where you can keep ahead of it, keep abreast of all the developments, but then still have a laugh with it. It's a really funny game. There's a lot of visual comedy in terms of the artwork and some like very tongue-in-cheek with the way that the flavor text and programs are named. A good one for the younger players, but a good one for the solo gamers as well.
Game number 2, in no particular order, once again, just clarify that. I think, again, limiting it to 3 is extremely difficult, but I don't think there's any number like right up to 20 that would be any easier to narrow the list down to. But I'm probably going to have to go for one that would be no surprise to anybody who's ever seen any lists of solo games, which is Mage Knight, the board game, which is consistently voted as number 1 solo game of all time in polls the world over. And for good reason. This is by Vlada Chvátil, who is one of the best game designers in the world and kind of my hero. And basically he goes around from genre to genre, designing a board game in a different field entirely and mastering it, then moving on. Like I'm sure I've called him before, like the Stanley Kubrick of board games. He's just like, Through the Ages is another one of my favourite 10 out of 10 games, but it's not really soloable. But yeah, Mage Knight. So Mage Knight, the board game, is essentially a fantasy adventure game, but it's very, very different in that it's a real brain burner, thinky game. So it has a little bit of exploration, a little bit of combat, a little bit of deck building. Your deck building is your deck is your health, and you're leveling up the cards within your deck. Thematically, it's weird because I love thematic games, and there's sort of quite a big, not quite a big. There's a disconnect between the theme and the mechanics for me personally, where the deck building doesn't quite fit with the movement, and you sort of have the background is you're this weird mage knight that's come to this land to like dominate it and just attack all the people and the castles and take over the place. And if you want, you can burn villages to the ground or monasteries to the ground and really cause chaos and get a bad reputation. Or you can play it as a nice guy and draw the people to you through negotiation and stuff. But there's really sort of very peculiar mechanics where you basically run out of movement points sort of arbitrarily depending on what cards you've played. And,
I see.
And sort of game turns come to a natural stop when you've just worked your way through your deck, which actually, I guess, represents you literally running out of energy in the game world. But all of the interactions with the game come down to not dice rolls.
Yeah.
They are based on the cards you have in hand. So you'll flip over an enemy, you'll see its stats, you'll look at your hand, and you'll try and find a way to overcome this enemy. But all the enemies have like a ton of different special abilities, resistances, elemental attacks, poison attacks, summoning attacks, and like a billion different things you have to consider. And so unlike most fantasy games where you sort of have a clear picture of what you're doing in the game, in this you're sort of using an ice crystal to summon a stone golem and using your rage to do a thing. And in a given turn, you'll be doing about 10 different things by the end of the game where you're playing down card after card after card, adding up like these rather complex mathematical equations to solve the puzzle of the enemy that you're facing in front of you, or enemies. And that said, if I'm making it sound like a negative experience, it really isn't. It's thoroughly, utterly addictive. It's a bugger to set up, and it takes a long time to play through. It takes me about probably the best part of 2 hours to go through a whole game. But the experience is so rewarding, and it's the kind of game that when I do set up, games are few and far between, but once I do, it stays on the table for bloody ages, and I'll keep going back to it, and it's like relearning it from scratch each time. I'll get like a cheeky victory, but I won't get like a romping like 300-point score because I'll be like, how do you play this game again? And there's a billion different things to remember, but all those things, all the different rules and rules exceptions and stuff, make for a really deep game experience. And it is very gamey,
Yeah.
more so, probably more mechanical than thematic for me personally, but that doesn't detract from the experience at all. It's a blistering, brain burny, really deep, enjoyable experience, and very puzzly, but very cool, with a lovely like fantasy map to explore as well. So
you just break out the trusty old slide rule and do some deep maths.
Yeah, get your logarithms and your trigonometry.
I can see what the attraction would be, especially in a solo experience. It's interesting that you've gone fantasy for pick number 2, and it's interesting that you've gone for something with a bit of a lot of resources for the table. Because I've also picked number 2. I'm going to take off my professional podcast co-host hat and put on my gooey fanboy hat. I'm going to pick Gloom of Kilforth by little-known games designer Tristan Hall. There's a massive shill alert here. We're not trying to just sell copies
We should
of the
video
game.
this so people can see the gun to your head. Right.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, no. Tristan's got a nice shade of beetroot. Hopefully we won't embarrass him too much. But it's one of the first games I picked up. Basically played it with playing it in solo in mind. Just because it's one of those games where not having a lot of stuff at home, where apart from the PlayStation, where you can actually just get a game out on the table, have a really deep experience on your Todd. It's a game though that have had great games with my mates, getting them around playing with it, and the rules, they just work just as well for like multiple players as they do for the solo experience. With the way that the game's set up, having the location cards out in front of you, plus all the Nemesis cards that you can have for the big bad fights, all the different encounter decks, all the different item decks. It's just really difficult to have the same game twice. In fact, it's practically impossible. So that's what keeps bringing me back, because it's a rainy afternoon. I've not got anything to do. I could hoover, but I'm not going to. No, I'm going to bust out Gloom of Kilforth, and I'm going to have a nice rollicking adventure. There's loads of different characters I can choose from. There's loads of different items. I'm determined to win with the vampire.
Are you having much success with him?
No, I tend to get too big for my boots mid-game and then crippling myself almost. Or not managing the location cards properly, or not hiding enough early.
Good.
That's what usually, it's what usually is my downfall. It's just getting hammered by monsters when you're not really expecting them to, just staying out in the Badlands. But yeah, it's just a really fun, enjoyable solo experience, really. And as fantasy games go, it's cracking. There's everything that you could want in there. Meet the kobold or come up against the werewolves and lich and lichen. I never lycanthrope. Never quite know how to pronounce those ones.
No one does.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a good, deep experience. Like I was saying, there's plenty going on. There's a lot to manage, and it just keeps you going. There's like tons of booty and treasure to pick up on as well. It's just got a lot going for it. A lot of moving pieces to keep you interested. So well done you for coming up with such a decent solo experience.
Well, thanks very much, Leki. That's made me very
Awkward.
and awkward now. But that's awesome, and I'm really glad that you do enjoy the solo experience, because obviously that was a huge part of the design, and the reason for the design was to make sure that it had like a consistent, coherent solo vibe. But yeah, we tried to crowbar as much into that as possible. So
nice.
glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's all good, and continue to do so.
Brill.
Okay, so what was...
I'm going to gallop on to the next one. So number 3 on my list, again, in no particular order of quality. And this is agonizing, because whatever I choose for this one is going to nudge out 3 or 4 like other amazing games on the list. But I'm going to plump for Kingdom Death Monster.
Nice.
Which is just a stunning achievement by anybody's standards. This was my first Kickstarter game that I backed, and I honestly thought after I'd spent the money, I'd probably never see it again. It was about 4 years in the making, and I think that was before people had any expectations that Kickstarters can take some time to come around.
It's a heavy-duty pledge as well, wasn't it, really?
It wasn't that much. It was. At the time it was. It was a lot to pay for a game, but I pledged $150 originally, which now is... in a miniatures game is probably considered quite cheap. That was to get like the basic game and a survivor level, I think. But as soon as I was given the opportunity, I went all in on the expansions to get all the extra content and stuff, which we barely even scratched the surface of, because this game is a monster. It's absolutely mammoth. So Adam Poots took all the $1 million or whatever, $2 million that he made, went away, disappeared off the radar, but he did keep people updated. He did keep them in the loop. He had a pre-existing business selling world-class miniatures and everything, so there was a lot of hope that he would come up with the goods. But I think there was also an expectation that the game would look pretty, and maybe that would be the extent of it.
Yeah, it's just a good way of picking up a lot of really nice miniatures.
Yeah, which I think probably I might still have been happy with. The miniatures are amazing. The world that he hinted at was really cool seeming. There wasn't even a playthrough video or a rule book or anything.
Yeah.
People were buying into this really grim, dark world that he'd created. And when he came back, when the game finally landed, it was breathtaking. Like, it is massive. It is crowbarred full of lore about the world. It has an incredible play experience. The dungeoneering part of it is completely not what I was expecting at all. You're building a settlement of people, of survivors in this brilliant world that's based heavily on sort of a lot of Japanese manga type stories like Berserk and things like that.
Yeah.
Where you're these survivors with nothing in the world waking up in darkness, and they're suddenly being eaten by a massive freaking lion, and they have to try and survive and claw its eyes out with their fingers and stuff. And all of a sudden it sets up this amazing nightmare world where you're up against a series of bosses, and between the boss fights you're developing your village and your settlement as you go. It's got everything. The settlement building stuff and the tech trees in that are really addictive.
Yeah.
The exploration before you go on the hunt is quite short, but it's also evocative. It has great, cool, random events that you go through. And then the actual boss fights themselves are brilliantly imagined. Every single fight is very different. Loads of games that have come out since have followed suit. We talked about Dark Souls recently, which is basically they've taken a part of Kingdom Death and just concentrated on that, the boss fights. So yeah, it for me broke all boundaries and just delivered a completely different experience to anything that I'd seen before. And it was he mentioned that Warhammer Quest, the original version, was his original sort of inspiration.
Yeah.
And he took that and just leveled up the whole experience of it.
Yeah, it kind of evolved the medium, didn't he, to make a sort of survival RPG experience as opposed to what was available, rather than just a standard dungeon crawl.
Yeah, and I don't think anything has come close since yet. Which isn't to say, there's not been much time for that to happen. And there have been other hugely ambitious sort of dungeon crawlers and stuff, but nothing that's really got the sense of scale or world building that he's delivered with Kingdom Death. It's remarkable by any stretch of the imagination or definition. Really, really stunning achievement.
Yeah, it's a brilliant game. It's very, very dark, but like you said, it's deep. There's so much material to delve into there.
Yeah.
And so much in terms of items and crafting and then character experiences and development.
Yeah.
It's
I probably would prefer if we could pick it up as a campaign as a group again, because there's a lot to track in the solo game.
Yeah.
But then you have complete control and you're experiencing the full story, so the story of every single character. In a multiplayer game, if your character gets killed off, which can happen within seconds of a fight starting, that can be disappointing. But in a solo game, you battle on with the rest of your village, whoever's left, sort of thing.
Fantastic. And like we were saying, before, it's games where the solo rules are so similar to the multiplayer rules. It's, you don't have to learn a whole new part of the rule book. You can just get stuck in and really enjoy it. Yeah. Nice. Well, I've gone on a different tact for my third and final game.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
So it's not survival. It's not dungeon crawly. If anything, it's more of a puzzler. It's Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective.
Ooh.
Yes. You play the part of one of the Baker Street originals. I've probably misquoted that. It's been a short time since I played it, but essentially these are the fanboys of Sherlock Holmes that follow him around and have been sort of semi-deputized to help Sherlock solve cases quicker. But instead of letting you do that, what Sherlock does is just rub your noses in how badly you've attempted to approach the case and then show you the right way to do it. So the base game was released in 1981. It's had a recent reprint since. The version I've got is from Ystari Games, but when I looked it up on Board Game Geek, it said plus 11 other publishers. So this game's had more publishers than I've had hot dinners.
Is that different languages?
I think it probably is. I think it's probably different languages and probably something to do with the reprint in recent times.
Yeah.
But as games go, this one's a bit of a blinder. It's very original in the way it's set out. It's probably one of the first storybook games. So you get a compendium of cases. There's 10 cases to begin with. Each case comes with its own unique newspaper, which has got a couple of red herrings in there. It's got some completely redundant information, a couple of advertisements, and a bit of sort of like semi-fictional historical musings in order to set the time and period. And it gives you a directory of people. So you might come across someone's secretary, so you'll look them up in the directory, give you map coordinates, which is essentially a reference in the case book to read a new paragraph and to see if you can glean any new information. Yeah. As you're running around London looking at clues, you'll be collecting points. So the more locations you go to, the more points you accrue, and the more points you got in the end, probably the less likely it is that you've discovered it in an efficient manner as Sherlock has.
So you've got to do it in as few turns as possible, right?
Exactly, yeah. There's a few clues and areas which you'll get for free. So if you go to visit the wife of a murdered person, then it'll probably be accepted that you'll visit them, or you'll visit the coroner. So it'll let you have those, but you don't know until the end which of those were free or not. So you're still having to really choose which locations you want to go to.
Nice.
It's a very straightforward game to play. You just need a notepad and a pencil to keep jotting down clues as you go to them, so you don't have to keep going back and forth in the clue book. But the great thing about it is it's very much akin to doing a really good crossword. It's such a puzzler. You just sit there, you have an argument either with the people that you're playing with, or in my case, yourself, and you just crack on. One of the downsides to this game as a multiplayer experience that I've noticed is that it's easy to play with people that are non-gamers, but they tend to burn out quite quickly after about an hour of playing. And this game can easily run for like 90 minutes if you let it, because it's just you versus the clock, really.
Yeah.
People tend to drop out. I know if I play it with my wife, it will be about 45 minutes before she's coming up with excuses to leave the table.
Hence the solo.
Exactly. So you bring it out as a solo, and you can just work through it at your heart's content. You can pick it up one night, you can put it back down, you can just keep reading over the notes again and come back to it if you want to. A bit like playing a game of chess with someone over Skype or whatever. And it's just a really, really nice game to play. There's 10 cases in there, so you've got loads to go over. Then there's additional cases and expansion available, and you just got loads to get on with. I just really enjoy it. It's definitely one for the being cut out. You've got an extra afternoon on your own. You don't really know what to do. You've watched all the Marvel movies, so just pull out the big old box of Sherlock Holmes inside it.
Is it possible to watch all the Marvel movies? There's so many of them.
Well,
that's an interesting choice. I've obviously never played it solo. I've never actually played Consultant Detective, but we did play Mythos Tales.
Yes, we did,
as a group, and I was really impressed with it.
Yeah.
So that's basically the same game, but instead of Sherlock Holmes themed cases, you're in Arkham,
exactly,
down Cthulhu minions and stuff. And I loved it. I thought it was really clever design, and it's obviously a complete rip-off of Sherlock Holmes Consultant Detective. Mm. So the same sort of applied detective abilities, going from location to location based on clues and stuff.
Yeah, it's the same
really
mechanics.
Elegant, simple.
Really straightforward.
Game mechanics, yeah. You're reading a book and you're trying to sort of gather the clues, but you choose which parts of the book you're going to read based on the clues that you've experienced, and
that's it.
You
yeah,
get like a mini narrative as you go, don't you? Does it work the same in Sherlock Holmes? We had like an experience where we went into the wrong house and got knocked out. Do you have things like that happen, or is it sort of more passive things happening?
It's more a lot of dead ends and red herrings in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. So you'll, for example, you might find a cigarette wrapper on the floor, and you'll be like, right, I'm going to go to the tobacconist and find out who would smoke this brand of cigarettes, and they'll give you a list of 15 people, and you can go around to each of those people. And it'll get you nowhere. There is one complaint with Sherlock Holmes Consultant Detective is the fact that it's a French game that's being translated to English. Yeah. And in a couple of the cases, there's some language issues that kind of lead you up the garden path, so to speak.
Oh, no. That's gotta be the worst thing to happen in a translation between games.
Exactly. It's a very, very minor criticism.
Can it break it, or is it just you might misinterpret the gist of it? Or
I think you can heavily misinterpret one of the cases. Yeah, you can. It can be a breaker.
And you, of course, won't want to check the FAQ for that, because that would be gigantic spoilers.
You don't want to know it's coming up, in which case. So yeah, it can be a bit of a problem there. But then you've got the additional cases that you can also work through. And like you're saying, if you've enjoyed Sherlock Holmes and then you want to play Mythos Tales, because it's practically the same game, just a very different setting, you're going to have... It's just like getting extra cases for one game or the other. If you've played one and really enjoyed it, I strongly recommend you get a copy of the other one, because all you've got is just more original content that you can work through. Like you mentioned, Mythos Tales is a lot more modern. It released just a couple of years ago now, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
So there's new
time to learn from them.
Yeah, there's new mechanics in there. You can basically get discovered as you're trying to find out where the cult is, and
you have sanity as well, or something. Do you? I think you track like an ability or something.
Yeah, there's a few things going from game to game. Yeah. No, it's very much a series of one-off experiences in the consulting detective.
So you can just pick up wherever and just pick a new scenario and go with
it. Yeah, you kind of recommended to go through it in a linear fashion because the newspapers all stack up. So when you're on case number 4, you've got the newspapers from cases 1 till 3 to help you as well.
Oh, so you're actually drawing from quite a lot of material.
Yeah, so it keeps banking up, and you kind of get a bit more of a realization as to how Sherlock... You're trying to work out how Sherlock might do it, but honestly, there's nothing... like, it sounds awful, but you're clawing out your hair, wondering how the hell this murder took place. Then you think you've just about managed to solve it, and then you get to the solving stage. Sherlock comes in and tells you were wrong. It took you a very long time to find out you were wrong. And also, you could have just done it by just looking at this person straight away.
Right.
So it's always like, it's amazing. It's great amount of satisfaction finding out what actually happened. And at the same time, you feel like such a fool for not realising it sooner.
So if you want to be overshadowed by the towering intellect of Sherlock Holmes, it's the game to go for. No, I'd look forward to actually giving that a try, because I did really enjoy Mythos Tales, so I'd love to see the original in action sometime.
Well, that's it. If you like a heavily wine-stained copy of the newspapers in a game, that can certainly give you a good lend.
Cool.
Nice one. Well, that's those were between us, in no particular order, our top 6 solo games experiences. If you want to add to that list, then feel free to get involved in the comments section, or drop us a line at the Facebook group, #BoardChitless, and let us know what your favourite solo games. Have you been a bit hacky and decided to create your own solo variant for a game where it doesn't actually have official solo rules? Please let us know and get involved with that chit chat. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week. Bye.